And not seeing it yet.
Facebook, YouTube lags a little bit. There's YouTube. YouTube's live. All right, YouTube's live. And let's go live.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show of self-interest and individual rights.
Hey, oops. I'm getting feedback from one of you.
The Yaron Brook Show.
I want to mute unless you're talking. All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show. It is Sunday, yes, Sunday evening, Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And hopefully everybody's doing well. And I've got our monthly contributor hangout today. So hi, guys. Jim,
Yeah.
Jennifer, Darius, Hans, and Jonathan. Everybody's here. And we might get one or two other joining us later, but for now, I think we've got a good setup. So, all right. So today, as always, we go around with everybody, and you get to ask a question, and then I get to answer it, and then we'll also do some. We'll take some super chat questions as well from those of you online on YouTube. Right. Good. So let's see. Jim, you want to go first?
Yeah, just a quick note. I'm still not seeing the stream on YouTube. You got it?
I am.
Okay, good. Ignore that.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hello, everyone.
All right. Yep. Go ahead. Question.
All right. So I want to ask an admittedly somewhat vague question. Ayn Rand wrote a chapter in one of her books titled The Monument Builders. And I know that a quote of yours from 2017 has been going around that we shouldn't even have a Washington Memorial and all these other monuments. And a number of thoughts have been rolling around my head about all this. It seems such a muddle how many different bad ideas are mixed in. I mean, for starters, it bothers me that a tiny minority opinion is trouncing a majority opinion in many of these places where the majority of people wouldn't even be wouldn't want these statues taken down, and these people are completely bypassing any democratic process. But Rand made a more general point that we shouldn't even be funding monuments of any sort, that they should be privately funded and owned, and also I guess made a bold statement, really, that when you look around the world, it's the authoritarian countries that demonstrate the most lavish monuments to typically to their leaders and effectively to themselves. And I wonder if you have comments on all this.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have a lot of comments on it. So first, with regard to the quote taken out of context that was dropped on Facebook, where I said there shouldn't even be a Jefferson Memorial or a Lincoln Memorial. I mean, the way it was presented was as if I don't like Jefferson or Lincoln, or I think they're equal to, the Jefferson Davis or Lee. No, I think it's fantastic that there's a Jefferson Memorial and a Lincoln Memorial, and they certainly deserve those memorials. I just don't think the state should own them. I think they should be privately built and privately funded and privately made. But they certainly are deserving of memorializing and celebrating with sculptures and memorials and street names and whatever we can to remember the giants that they are. But it's not the state's business to build such memorials. And you can see that with the effort to build a FDR memorial. And what next? An Obama memorial, a Trump memorial. I mean, FDR was not a good president. Many Americans who know a little bit of history know that he did a lot of damage to this country and has set us up on a path from which we are suffering today, and an economic path, a cultural path, a philosophical path. And yet, why not build him a memorial? He's admired and he's respected by a majority. But this is the problem. Once the government gets to decide who was a good president and who was a bad president, who deserves a memorial, who doesn't deserve a memorial, not a good idea. Now, somebody made the joke of, well, shouldn't there, you mean there won't be paintings inside government buildings? Sure, but they don't have to be paintings of presidents or paintings that pick certain people out. And commemorate certain people, or they can be. I don't really care. But the point was that the government should not get into the business of ideas and projecting ideas to the public. If you want to have paintings and sculpture inside government buildings, so be it. I mean, we as taxpayers should think about that. If that is the best use of our tax money, is to make buildings that the government. I mean, generally, I don't like the fact that government buildings are big, ostentatious, expensive, and looking down. They're always on a hill. They're always in some cities, you're not allowed to build taller than the state capitol or whatever. I mean, that gives government a kind of imposing status of a king and an authoritarian that I think is inappropriate. I mean, what Ayn Rand talked about in The Monument Builders, and I haven't read it in a long time, is she noted the authoritarians always build monuments to themselves, to their rule, whether it's the pyramids, which is what the pharaohs built to themselves, or you just think about Hitler's grand architectural plans for Germany and Berlin, and the states. There's definitely Nazi art. If you think about communist art, I mean, art promoted by the state to glorify the state, to glorify the agenda of the state. I'm against all of that. But part of the monuments they build, and this goes to FDR, are not literally monuments. Part of the monuments they build are social programs. FDR's monuments, though we have, is basically the regulatory state, Social Security, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, the Federal Home Loan Board, I think it's the board, HUD. I mean, the whole institutionalization of the regulating finance is a legacy, a monument of FDR's. The welfare state is a monument of FDR. Social Security is a monument of FDR. And the same with Johnson. I mean, Johnson will be remembered for Medicare, Medicaid, and the war on poverty. Nixon's monuments are the war on drugs and the environmental regulations, the EPA. And people don't know this, but almost all the environmental regulations that we have today were at least instituted originally under Nixon and then expanded under other presidents. So it's not just physical monuments. It's the glorification of the state and the glorification of themselves that leaders are involved in, and it's at whose expense? It's the expense of all of us, always. Monetary expense, life, going to war for the state. So literally life, the glorification, all of it involves our money, our time, our lives, our freedom. So I'm against it, but nothing I said should diminish the greatness and grandeur of Lincoln and Jefferson. I love the Jefferson Memorial. I love the quotes. I love that.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Washington Monument.
Yeah, I hate the Washington Monument. No, I think the Washington Monument is a disgrace. It is one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. It is a tribute to Egyptian culture. Yeah, why Washington why you would have a monument to one of the greatest men of history that is a obelisk, an Egyptian form, instead of a real sculpture, like Daniel Chester French, if I'm not mistaken, sculpted the Jefferson Memorial, one of the maybe the greatest American sculptor of all time. Washington doesn't deserve that. And by the way, there's a great story about the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument. Congress decided to build the Washington Monument and allocated funds to build it. I think it took them 40 years to build it. They ran out of money, and construction wasn't that good. It was just a disaster from day one. It took them forever to build it. Give you a counterexample to that is the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from France, but it was not built with public money. It was built with private money. Private money was raised in order to assemble it in New York. It was assembled in something like 3 months. It was super fast, super quick. And it is in many regards, it is a private monument because it was funded privately. So I think that is the contrast. Washington Monument's a disgrace, and a sad that is what the government, Congress, chose to use to commemorate, President Washington.
It was a great contrast.
Frank, thank you for that very generous contribution. He says he's an anarchist and he's giving me money in spite of that. So thanks. All right, Jennifer.
What do you think of these companies recently withdrawing brands like Aunt Jemima and Eskimo Pie and things like that?
I mean, look, brands, it's an issue of marketing and right. I don't think there's anything, I don't oppose that in principle. I don't get the Eskimo pie. Eskimo's cold. There's nothing derogatory. I kind of get the Jemima reference because of the context, the historical context in which it was done. It is somewhat insulting, to blacks, that image that is projected. So I get that they want, from a marketing perspective, to change the image of whatever it is that they're selling. I really have no real problem with that. But the Eskimo one I think it's ridiculous. But Eskimos really insulted by having an ice cream named after them. That's just bizarre. But I'm sure that it goes overboard. And look, what is there? There's the Cleveland Indians. I don't know if there's pressure for them to change their name because Indians. I don't know. Redskins, Washington Redskins. There's pressure on the Washington. I don't get it. But I guess maybe if you're a Native American and we live in a tribal world right now. We live in a world full of tribes where people get easily insulted if they think their tribe is being insulted. So I'm not surprised, and I think you'll see a lot more of it. It's just the beginning. It's the tip of the iceberg. Political correctness is on steroid and is now being mainstream completely. So in that sense, Black Lives Matter won. They won big time in establishing much of what they think. They're more moderate positions. I don't think their nutty positions are winning, but their more moderate positions, I think, are winning out a majority of Americans.
Thank you.
It's just a reality. Let's see, Darius. You're muted. Muted.
Okay. So yeah, on the topic of BLM, I think this is our first hangout since the protests began. So you've spoken critically about them in recent episodes, and while I certainly agree that a lot of the protests have kind of created a toxic atmosphere where reasons given way to emotionalism, and insane ideas like abolishing the police and all white people have to confess their guilt. But what I want to try to do today is play devil's advocate on the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly around the narrow issue of anti-Semitism, which I think you've focused on quite a bit in the past. I was researching the connection between the BLM movement and anti-Semitism.
Is that yours, Darius?
Unfortunately, it's Alfie, yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, it's part of having a great watchdog. Sometimes he goes berserk at the wrong time. So on the flip side, I'm safe as heck up here.
Here you go.
So I was researching the connection between the BLM movement and anti-Semitism, and I found a number of articles written in 2016 that refer to what was at that time a recently written manifesto. And I haven't been able to find anything more recent than that that cites this. And all the links to the actual sources to try to see what that manifesto says, those pages are all gone, or they're just pages that no longer speak to that. And the talking points on the actual BLM website at this point appear to be sort of generic progressive talking points of inclusion and equality, and they appear to have disassociated themselves with those trying to use their cause to promote an expanded agenda that includes anti-Semitism. So while they still will always be a magnet for evil intellectuals to try to tag along with them, it's not clear to me that we should throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Well, this is the problem. The problem is that BLM was founded, and its founders are 3 women, and you can find their names. I don't remember their names, and you can track their record. And these 3 women are very influential. They speak for the group. They appear on television, and you can find out what they stand for. And they stand for the nuttiest, most leftist, Marxist, socialist, anti-Israeli. I don't know if it's anti-Semitic. I don't think I claimed they were anti-Semitic, but they're anti-Israel in a disgusting way agenda. So, and as far as I know, BLM as an organization has never denounced these 3 women who were the founders, who again speak for them under the title. Now they have cleaned their website. I remember in 2015, 2016, going to the BLM website and finding anti-capitalist screeds. I remember that when they protested in Chicago from that horrible shooting of a young man by a Chicago police officer that literally shot him 16 times in the back. And I mean, he was ultimately sent to jail, the cop. I mean, it was a horrible shooting. But they didn't choose to demonstrate in front of City Hall or in front of the police or anything like that. They chose $1 Million Mile and were purposefully preventing people from shopping and obstructing the ability. And they were being interviewed at the time. And their anti-capitalist agenda was very, very clear and obvious. So I don't think that it's an issue of being hijacked. I just think it's an issue of they've got a broad agenda. They realize it hurts them to put that up front. They want to gain legitimacy for this much more radical agenda through advocacy around police shootings. But what they sign, what they name, what the movement represents is a much bigger agenda. And I think they're trying to con us. So with so everybody's wearing a Black Lives Matter sign and T-shirts and everything because we all think that it's a narrow agenda. But when you hear them talk on television, the agenda is broader and broader and broader and really crazy. I mean, it's not a left of center agenda, right? It is a nutty, radical left agenda, and it's very, very dangerous. And therefore, I do think we should throw the bathwater out with the baby. I'm not sure there is a baby there. I think it's all dirty bathwater. There is an issue that's true, the issue of police abuse and potential racism in the police force. But that issue, we should not let a group like Black Lives Matter dominate. If that is an issue people care about, they should start an organization dedicated to that issue and not let Black Lives Matter dominate that issue. Plus, if you think about when they really gain prominence, they gain prominence around the, forget his first name, something Brown,
Martin,
Ferguson.
Michael Brown, yeah.
Michael Brown and Ferguson. But if you read the transcript of the court case against the cop in the Michael Brown case, it turns out that the police were completely justified in shooting Michael Brown. That is, Michael Brown was not a case of police abuse, and this is why he was let go. And all you have to do is go and read the court case, which colleagues of mine have done, and it's quite clear that Michael Brown was reaching for a gun of the police and was shot in self-defense. And yet they have never said, okay, not Michael Brown, right? Or Trayvon Martin, which is again, he was not innocent at all. So they don't separate the cases between when it's true police abuse, like this case in Minneapolis and other cases that we've seen video of, and cases where it's not. So they just lump it all together. So you have to be careful of that if you're going to support the better portion of their cause as well. So it's a package deal.
Yep.
Like Einstein talked about package deals with good and bad, but they have defined their package deal. And the only way to deal with a package deal like this is to trash the concept and to come up with a new one.
One quick little note too. One of the founders of the BLM organization yesterday was quoted literally, in video as saying, "We are trained Marxists." I mean, you can't get more literal than that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, when you read them, another one, I read an interview with another one who calls herself an abolitionist. Abolitionist because her goal is to abolish the police and the jail system. She wants to abolish all police and jail. These are the intellectual leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. So you have to judge a movement by its leaders.
Thank you.
It's hard too, because you have to talk to your friends and say, man, I know what you're trying to say here by standing for them, but you're standing with the wrong people.
Yeah, I think that's right. Darius, you looked like you wanted to follow up.
No, thank you.
Jonathan?
Thanks, Yaron. Politics is just, it's too depressing and tribal. So I'm going to ask you about something completely different if I could, which is much more joyous, and that is classical music. And I just wanted to thank you for inspiring me to rediscover it a little bit for myself. Nothing too esoteric, kind of the greatest hits, Brahms, Mozart, Schubert, etc. And it kind of got me thinking as I was listening and really enjoying to some of it, Yaron, that I was exposed to a lot of classical music as a kid. I mean, at the very least, we listened to that Peter and the Wolf album hundreds of times.
It's great music, yeah.
The kind of, but things like Fantasia and some of the old cartoons that, you didn't know what Bolero was from, but you knew that theme, basic themes. So, my parents brought me to some things here and there. So I had exposure to that as a kid. So my question is, now I guess that's ridiculed as kind of white guy music, and that you're not supposed to, I don't know, maybe you're not supposed to teach that to kids. But how important is it to give kids a musical education, to expose them to music like that, so that they can, at the very least, kind of rediscover it later on? And I guess I'll weave a little politics in there, like, is classical music going to suffer now because it's being lumped in as like, well, we've got to get some tribal drum banging because you happen to have some ancestor, you know what I'm saying? Are we going to go that same kind of route? Because the music, the classics are so satisfying in a way that no other music is. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And this is a topic Ayn also talked about, in a sense that she talks in the Romantic Manifesto about folk music and the popularity of folk music, and she kind of, ridicules that and tells us, the value is very superficial and very trivial and primarily tribal. It's the sense of belonging to the tribe where this folk music came from. And classical music is truly universal. I mean, I think I did a show where I talked about the fact that I was in London. I went to see a performance of Rachmaninoff. I think it was Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto. And no, it was actually second piano concerto. And the pianist was brilliant. And I'd never heard of him, but he was an Uzbek pianist from Uzbekistan, center of Asia, a Muslim country. I mean, pretty secular, but a Muslim country in Uzbekistan. And here's a guy from Uzbekistan playing this amazing performance of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, which we associate with very much the West, right? And if you go to performances, you'll find so many Chinese violinists and pianists and conductors or Japanese conductors, Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, and you can go on and on and on. I mean, a lot of the talent today in classical music comes from Asia, not from Europe. And it shows how universal it appeals to universal values. It connects to universal emotions in a way that I don't think any other music does or can. And it's got a depth and a passion that no other music brings out. And I think it's tragic. I mean, that it's been thrown out, and I think it's been thrown out for a number of reasons. One is, yeah, it's by a bunch of white, dead white men, I guess is the thing. So dead white men, stuff they write or they do is no longer there. But then beyond that, it's old. I mean, what's the value in old stuff, right? So it's all subjective. How can you say, Yaron, that it's better than rap? What makes it better than rap? How could you define it being better than rap? There are no standards, certainly not in the arts, right? We know that by going to any modern art museum. There are no more standards. There's no idea of greatness in aesthetics. There's no good and bad. Anything goes. It's whatever the emotions of the critics and dictates. So I think it's incredibly tragic. It used to be that music was part of an education. And I think art should be part of a well-rounded education. It's not one of the 5 required topics that you have to get through, but it certainly should be an add-on and one of the first add-ons to kind of the history and literature and math and science that you teach. I think you cannot be a complete human being without embracing the arts. And I think the thing to expose kids to is the best, not the mediocre, not the bad, but the best. So the greatest hits of the classical era in music certainly should be part of that. And remember, I mean, you were bringing that up. Somebody mentions this in the chat. You remember Bugs Bunny, the Barber of Seville, or Bugs Bunny, even Wagner. He does Wagner, Bugs Bunny does. And it just, now some of that is just, every time I hear the Wagner piece, I think Bugs Bunny, which kind of spoils it for me. But it kind of inculcated a certain attitude towards music that we were exposed to it as kids, which I don't think exists anymore today. And I criticized The Simpsons.
Well, what about this? I'm going to throw this out there. What about using some classical music as your intro music? How can we, what I'm saying? Like, is there a way to...
It's hard because I think doing that trivializes the music. I think intro music is exactly where you want trivial music in the intro, right? You want something that is just an intro. Like, I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't actually like listening to classical music in the background of stuff that I do. And, it's like Mozart used to put on these operas. And in the theater during the opera, people used to yell and shout, and it's like so insulting to the music. It's like, shut up and listen, right? And so to me, classical music is I revere it too much to have it as a background. I mean, somebody once, here's a story for you. So I was once auditioned for a reality show. Yeah, a reality show. Yaron Brook was auditioned for a reality show. They approached me. The reality show actually ran, but they didn't pick me. And it was a complete failure, so I'm glad they didn't pick me. The reality show was to run a bunch of people for president of the United States while the actual election was going on, to do a mock election. And at the end of every episode, there was an assignment, and somebody got kicked off, or the people voted for you, in the audience watching. And I think they asked me what would be my introductory music, and I think I said something like Camina Buruna by Carl Orff or something like that, which I think would make great introductory music. But they're right, not for a political campaign. You'd alienate half the audience, right? I auditioned for that, and they did not include me.
Did you give your kids classical music education? Did you expose them?
Yeah, but yes, I did.
Well, let's face it, we'd all be the first.
I could have done a better job at it, but I did. Yeah.
We'd all be the first to be voted off the island, wouldn't we?
Yeah, my kids were surrounded by good art everywhere you looked, and I tried not to preach about it. I tried not to kind of, but everywhere they looked, there were sculptures, there were paintings on the walls, and there was music played in the house. So that's the way they got their education.
Well, thank you again for reigniting my appreciation and love.
I'm really happy about that. I mean, it's I hear that from people who because I mentioned classical music, have gone back and tried it for the first time. Many people, right? Because a lot of people have not been exposed to it, were not exposed by their parents, or didn't have the kind of education or the kind of household where they could have been exposed to it. And yes, everybody should try classical music and start with the greatest hits. Start with the things that are the easiest to grasp. Don't start with Mahler or Wagner or Stravinsky or something. Start with Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, and even there, start with the catchier ones. Don't go to the heavy stuff first. All right, Hans. Hans, I think this is your first time here.
It is. I generally thank you for recognizing. It's generally difficult for me to join in, but I got the invitation the other day. All right, I'll give it a try.
Good.
It was a struggle to put together some questions to not waste your time, but I've come up with a couple. But I'd first like to circle back around to the subject of monuments. I live out west, and it's beautiful out here. I love the great outdoors.
Sure.
Right, smack in the middle of the upper west is Mount Rushmore.
Yep.
I don't know if I'd consider it a work of art. It is sculpture on a grand scale.
Yep.
And I enjoyed taking my kids there when we drove through there, 10, 15 years ago. But that seems the kind of aggrandizement that to some extent, even though it might be privately funded. I don't know the story behind it, but
it is privately funded. It's privately funded, and it was a project of the sculptor. It was his dream to do it, and then he actually started carving a mountain, I think in West Virginia or somewhere, of a Indian on a horse, which
crazy
is
horse,
but it's the size of a mountain, right?
Yeah,
and
that's out here in Wyoming too.
His children were trying to finish it, and but he was quite a sculptor. And I mean, I'm not a fan of Mount Rushmore, partially because I don't like the presidents he chose.
That was my next question. Who would you have chosen for if you're going to do it, and who would have you chosen to be on that mountain?
Well, Washington has to be. You have to have Washington up there. I do think Jefferson belongs there. I don't know that he was a great president, but his role in writing the Declaration certainly justifies him being up there. After that, the problem is obscure, right? I would use Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, I think, vetoed more bills by Congress than any other. He refused to spend any money. He believed in freedom and capitalism, and he was just an exceptional president in just shutting everything down. From the 20th century, I choose Coolidge, but he's probably the best of the 20th century. I don't know if there are more 19th century presidents better than Coolidge. I wouldn't have done John Adams just because his presidency he only served one term. He did have the Alien and Sedition Act, which is a big black mark on his record. So while he's definitely one of the great founding fathers, as a president, he wasn't that great. You could argue Madison, certainly as the father of the Constitution, deserves to be up there. So maybe I would just make it founding fathers. I would do Washington, Jefferson, and Madison as those three who both were presidents, and maybe if you did it as founding fathers, not as presidents, I would include John Adams. Certainly those four are the most important of the founding fathers. Many would say Hamilton too, but Hamilton never got to be president. So those would be two. Cleveland, Coolidge would be more modern ones. Unfortunately, we haven't had great presidents. I mean, Lincoln, I consider a great president in spite of the fact that he did institute an income tax, and he did institute a draft, and he did some really, really, really bad things during the war. But I think all of that is trumped by the fact that he fought a war to at the end, free slaves. He did save this great country. And because I think he gave some great speeches and was a real intellectual. He had this, he was all the presidents. I think he was the one who had the greatest and deepest respect for the Declaration of Independence and viewed it correctly is the foundational document of the country. That is the foundation for the Constitution. So, so Lincoln certainly would deserve to be on a Mount Rushmore, together with some of the people I mentioned.
Good. I like that answer. Thank you.
But generally, I'd like to see a Mount Rushmore of, let's see, J.D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, maybe in modern times, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And I'm sure in between we could think of some other people, Thomas Edison. So I'd love to see, instead of monuments to generals and politicians, I would love to see, did we lose video?
Yeah, but your audio is still good.
Audio is still good. And wait a second, let me see what's going on here. Oh, I see. Okay, there we go.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I would like to see the equivalent of streets, sculptures, paintings, all of the grandeur to the people who actually built this country in the 19th century, which were the great businessmen. And I'm sure there are many, many others, who were responsible for making this country what it is today. And those, to some extent, were politicians, but much more than that, were the great industrialists and the great innovators and the great producers of the last 250 years. All right, Julian.
Hi, Yaron.
Hey, Julian.
So next time you're in DC, you should check out, there's a Mr. Sunshine Museum here that I discovered about last summer. It's a period museum for Joseon, where
For Joseon?
Yeah, for where it was previously owned by the Korean legation in the late 19th century. And you can go, there's two very nice people who run it, and they make you take your shoes off and you come inside, but it looks just like the set of Mr. Sunshine.
Great. So in Korea, I've heard, the set of Mr. Sunshine has actually been turned into a tourist attraction. So you can actually go and visit the Glory Hotel and go visit the different places where they actually played out the scenes. So it's actually like an amusement park. So my wife and I are planning, we're going to go to Korea one of these days, and that's definitely a stop that we're going to make is to go to where they shot the movie, the TV series.
Yeah, it's so elegant, the scenery and the visual.
Yep. Do you have a question or you don't have to.
Yeah. Next time.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I'm going to take a super chat question. Yohan, have you seen the movie The Physician? If yes, what are your thoughts? If no, I recommend it. It's Aristotelian. Yeah, I mean, The Physician, I have seen it. It's very enjoyable. I don't know that it's a great movie, but it's got great ideas. It's about a young man, if I remember right, he's born in England, but wants to learn to be. He witnesses people dying. I can't remember of what, maybe the plague or something, and he's interested in the potential of curing. He's interested in being a doctor, but in Europe, which is during this period barbaric, there is no such thing as medicine. And he hears from the Jews, I think, he hears that there's a faraway land in Persia where they actually study medicine, and they've actually got cures for diseases, and this is a field to study. So he actually travels from England to the Middle East, and he enrolls in a school of medicine, and they're very Aristotelian, and they're explicitly Aristotelian in this school, and they teach him the principles of medicine as they are known at the time. And it's based on a true story. The School of Medicine actually did exist. It goes back to claims I've made many times in the past that during the Dark Ages, the Islamic civilization was a real civilization. It was making advancements in knowledge far exceeding anything in the West. This movie shows that, and it's quite entertaining. I don't think the movie's very well made. I think the budget was probably not that, although it's got some good actors. But it is a really interesting movie. It's called The Physician. It's not that old. It's maybe 10 years old. And I'm not sure if it's available on Netflix or exactly where it's available, but I saw it, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, although I always underestimate. Maybe it was longer than that. I can't tell anymore. I'm getting old. All right. Jim.
Okay, I was trying to decide which of my various questions to ask here. What do you think about the what's happening lately, where it seems like companies are being forced largely by, I think, the left to take positions, to be political versus just sell us stuff, and I don't want to know about or care who they vote for and whatnot, but what do you think of this process, and do you sense that it really is weaponizing big companies against individuals?
Yeah, well, it's weaponizing the mixed economy, and it's weaponizing the involvement of the state in economics, and it's inevitable because once the state, once politicians, once government involves itself with the corporations, involve itself in the world of business, involves itself in markets like the Fed is doing. I did a show on this last week. It's inevitable that they put pressure on corporations to support their agenda or not support their agenda, and you get favors if you support it, and you don't get it if they don't. And the oil industry is known to be Republican, and the .com industry is known to be Democratic, and all this stuff that we live in a world, because government is so powerful, because government is so much in our lives and everywhere, we live in a world where everything is politicized. You can't talk about anything without politics coming into mind. Everything becomes politics. Everything becomes left or right. Everything becomes your tribe or my tribe. This is the damage that the mixed economy does, and it's inevitable. And the only way to stop it or to slow it down is to start moving away from statism. And we're not moving away from statism. We're accelerating towards it. And again, it doesn't matter who the president is. We seem to be heading in one direction, which is towards greater and greater statism. And that is, it's tragic to see this great country and these great businesses forced to kind of make a statement. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like if you're in the financial world like I am, in a hedge fund. Now, my hedge fund's very small, so I don't have to deal with this. But if I were big and successful, I would have a lot of the natural investors to invest in my hedge fund. The people who can write really big checks are pension plans, public pension plans. Now, public pension plans don't invest just with a financial incentive. They are clearly motivated by ideology, and they want to know that you, as a steward of their money, are going to have the right views, and you are not going to be able to get the money from them unless you say the right things. And now, in a laissez-faire capitalist world, there are no public pension plans. Indeed, there are no pension plans, certainly none as big as CalPERS and Colsters and some of these massive, largest institutional investors, certainly in the United States, not quite as big as the Norwegian Wealth Fund, which is indeed the largest institutional investor in the world. And it too has a political agenda and invests based on that agenda, right? So you can't, so for example, I won't name names, but there is a large institutional wealth management firm that has managed in the past hundreds of billions of dollars, and who is run by somebody who is very much a libertarian and who is a huge Ayn Rand fan. But almost all the money he has under management is pension plan money. So once in a while, the firm under his signature has to come out with positions that I don't believe he actually believes in. But the pension plans are squeezing him, and he's got partners, he's got employees. If you run a public company, you've got shareholders. What do you do? So the more you blur the lines between government and the private sector, the more you politicize the private sector. And it's horrible. It's unjust, and it's destructive, and it really, really is evil. Jennifer.
Have you ever noticed sometimes art?
Yep.
Oh, have you ever noticed about artists? This is not true of everyone, of course. It wasn't true of Ayn Rand, of course, but artists like Edgar Allan Poe or Hemingway or Van Gogh, or just people who are artistic, that they often have problems, they're alcoholics or something. Do you think that's in some people part of being creative, or do you think they're just because they're misunderstood that causes them to have issues?
So I don't think it's necessary for creativity, but it might be for some people. That is, I think that, art is a reflection of an artist's deep values that they have to hold strongly. And I think a lot of artists who, have a very negative emotions, but they hold them very strongly. They reflect those emotions. So I'm not making myself clear. So I think that it's, I don't think it's necessary the creative process, but the fact is many artists have been that way. They have been depressed. Many musicians, Beethoven, Mahler, but on the other hand, Schubert was not. Tchaikovsky was, I think he was a homosexual at a time where being homosexual was, was really rough, was really difficult in a culture like that. But because they feel strongly, right? They take their values and their experiences strongly. They reflect that in the art in powerful, powerful ways. I think great artists take their metaphysical value judgments, take their fundamental views of the world very seriously, and they emote them. They feel. So they're very, not emotionalist, right? Because they don't place emotion necessarily above reason, but they feel strongly. And unfortunately, I think in the past and probably in the present, most of the people who feel strongly, who have these really strong emotions, they tend to be negative because of the world in which we live and the circumstances in which many people live. The people who feel strongly, who experience positive things, some of them become artists, and you can see their artwork. But yeah, I don't know that they become something else. It's just that there are fewer of them because of the kind of world we live in. But it's not necessarily, it's not like artists have to suffer in order to be creative. They have to have powerful, big emotions, and they have to not carry them on their sleeves, but they have to be willing to reflect them in their art. And again, this is a response to your metaphysical value judgments, the most important values that you have. And most of us just have important views about our metaphysical value judgments, but it's not important for us to express them. It takes a different type of person who wants to express them and cares about expressing them. And many of those people happen to be people who suffer. It's the best I can do. Wait, Hans.
Along those lines, there are quite a few writers out there, and more so there because we're a wealthier nation and people have time to write. So there's a lot of good literature being produced out there, and I also believe there's probably some very good art being paintings and so on, sculpture out there. I haven't sought out as much as I'd like, but how about classical music? Besides very good musicians who can perform, there's a lot of very good young, absolutely astounding young performers out there. But do you know if there are people writing good classical music, and where do you find it if they do?
So I haven't seen much. I mean, once in a while I'll hear of what are called the neo-romantics, some classical music that's being written that is actually has is not noise and you can actually listen to, but it is rare and it's unusual and it's hard to find. I would look neo-romanticism in classical, but this is the thing I find with painting and sculpture, which is something I know more about than modern music or more than I know about certainly literature, is that there is some good stuff out there and you can find it, but it's not great. It's good. And when it's really good, it's usually dark because of, again, what the world is like. The spirit of the 19th century and the spirit of what came before and the attitude towards arts and the kind of dedication art required from the Renaissance on, just doesn't exist. I find that people who want to do good themes don't take technique as seriously, and people who take technique very seriously are pretty dark thematically, because that's just philosophically where they're coming from. And generally, while there is good work out there, there's very little great work out there, and it's just part of it is technique. We've lost 100 years of great technique. There are few schools that teach it, like in painting, or sculpture. There are few schools around the world that teach the master's technique in painting and sculpture, but not many, and they can't teach that many people, and not everybody's good enough to actually manifest it. So there's good work out there, but there's not, you'd expect a lot more. I think you're right. We should be flooded with artists, right? Because we're wealthy. For example, there are tons of comedians. There are lots of movie actors and aspiring movie actors. There are a lot of movies being made. There's tons of television. But there's not that much painting, sculpture, classical music, and I don't know about literature. So, I hope you're right that there's a lot of good literature out there. But, somebody mentioned Alma Deutsch, this young girl who composes classical music. You should look her up. I'm not knowledgeable enough to know if it's great or not, or if it's good or not. It certainly is pretty and melodic and enjoyable. So I would definitely recommend Alma, ALMA Deutsch, DEUTCH. It's worth listening, and she's a kid. I mean, I can't remember how old she is now, but she wrote her first opera something when she was 9 or something like that. So that's definitely worth looking for. All right, Jonathan.
Good.
You mentioned a few weeks ago, Yaron, that you were going to be turning 60, and I wondered if you had any thoughts or perspectives on that milestone.
That's next year. Don't rush it.
All right.
No. I just turned 59.
All right.
I just turned 59 in May, and I will be turning 60 next year. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely it's definitely a milestone in a sense that, and I noticed this when I was 50, when I turned 50, but it's even more so at 60. Your planning horizon shrinks, right? When I was young, I remember thinking to myself, one day I'll do this. One day I'd like to do that. One day I want to go there. One day I want to, or I'd like to build this. I'd like to make that. I'd like to contribute to this. Time's running out. That's the sense that you get when you approach these milestones. And it gives us an urgency to life, urgency to enjoy what you're doing and to make every moment count. But I'm just my character, right? My personality. I don't spend much time thinking about the past. I never have. I don't remember much of it. Ask me what I did 2 years ago. I vaguely remember. Certainly 20 years ago, I have no idea. Luckily, I have a wife who remembers stuff like that, and maybe there are photos and stuff that help me remember stuff, because I don't remember stuff. I don't really remember when my kids were little. I kind of vaguely have a collection, but not in detail. And I'm not really emotionally connected to the memories. I live in the future. I'm a planner. I'm constantly thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow, what I'm going to do next year, what I'm going to do in 10 years, what I'm going to do in 20 years. Suddenly, I can't do that. 20 years? What am I? 20 years? I'll be 80. That's, your whole, when you're 30 or 40, even 20 years is, nothing. I mean, you can plan for that. But when you're 60, you can't do that. You have to say, no, 20 years doesn't exist. You can plan for 10. And then you're going to have to moderate your plans because those other 10 years, you might not be as fit. So, who knows what's going to happen. That to me is the biggest issue. And to me, it's particularly upsetting because I'm so future oriented. So it's difficult. I don't find it easy. Aging, I find very hard. I found my 50th birthday very hard. And I have already a sense that my 60th is going to be very difficult. But I can't change it.
Do you find you fear death in this sense?
No, not really. I used to. And now fear is not the right word. You know how when you read a really good novel, like you're reading Les Miserables, and it's a long book, and you've lived with the book for like a couple of months, and you like dread that it's going to end because you're not going to be in that universe anymore. So my attitude towards death is, I'm in this novel. I want to know how it all plays out, right? I want to know what happens. I want to know what happens to objectivism. I want to know what happens to America. I want to know what happens in the world. I'm curious, and I don't want that to end. To think about the world continuing after I die is like weird, and it's hard to care about that. So it's more. I'm curious, and you're telling me I'll never find out. I'll never know, and that just pisses me off. What do you mean I'll never know?
What is Yaron? What is the line that Rand quoted, that it's not that I'll die, that the world will end?
Yeah, the world ends when I die, and for her, that's absolutely right. And
Quoting Victor Hugo, is it?
And I don't want the world to end because it's too interesting. There's too many things I haven't done yet. Too many, and I don't know how the story ends. I want to know if the guy gets the girl in the end. I want to know if there's a happy ending or not. And it's, I have to say, sadly, that as I become more pessimistic over the last few years, some of that has gone away. I'm less curious about how it ends because I have this horrible feeling it's not ending well, and the guy does not get the girl at the end of the movie. So,
Yaron?
Well,
but that's sad.
Yaron? That's part of why I'm having a lot of problems now with the way things are at the moment with the pandemic, because I can't look forward to things. I can't plan and look forward, and I love doing that. I'm just like stuck.
I know it's so frustrating because you don't know when it's going to change. Now, we've got Puerto Rico here is opening up, so we can kind of start planning our lives in Puerto Rico. But then the plan was to go to California in July, which I'm really looking forward to, just because I miss planes, I miss airplanes, I miss airports, I miss change. So I'm looking forward to that. But on the other hand, it's like, what's life like in California? Which restaurants are open? Who's gone out of business? Are the gyms open? Which gyms are they getting? So all of that, it created this massive uncertainty about, and like I've got all these plane tickets to go to Europe in September and in October. And like I'm going to Israel in October to see my family. And it's like, what's the chances of any of that happening? I don't even know how to handicap it. It's probably less than 50% that any of that is going to happen. And that's like infuriating, not because of going, it's because I can't plan okay, well, I don't go. What do I do then? And it's like, no planning the future makes it very hard to deal with the present. Let's see, Darius.
Thanks, Yaron. So I'd like to get your opinion about a certain aspect of the PPP loans that came out recently. So I understand Rand's viewpoint that we should accept a government handout when it crosses our path, if we consider it a form of restitution, and provided that we were morally opposed to wealth distribution in the first place.
Yep.
And I've heard you apply that framework to the $1,200 COVID-19 stimulus checks that were sent out to a lot of folks recently. Mm-hmm. But in terms of PPP, well, I've heard you talk about it in general terms. And I think I've heard Onkar Ghate talk about it a bit. And these are the next round of stimulus after the $1,200 checks for those who are not aware that a lot of small
Stimulus
businesses.
to small businesses.
Yeah, exactly. But there's sort of a kind of almost an elephant in a room thing that I feel like has not been addressed, like really significant money issue that's presented itself for a lot of small businesses. That's just in a completely another category beyond any entitlement that I've ever heard of. And simple examples is this. Let's say you're a small business owner and you have 60 employees, say, which is not at all uncommon. And a payroll that size, you probably qualified for about $1 million of PPP loans.
Yep.
And all you had to do was state that you had it was a financially challenged time, which was the case for the majority of businesses 3 months ago. Now, let's say kind of the economic tides have turned, improved, and things are looking okay for you in your business. Well, you're at this point, you're sitting on 900,000, maybe it's still $1 million of free cash flow.
Yep. And
if you're prudent, you'll probably hold on to it for another year because there'll be more waves of virus, and et cetera. But at some point, you're going to be sitting on 800, 900,000 of free cash flow. And, which is just basically an owner's distribution at that point, which is a huge windfall. Mm-hmm. And even if you have a few owners, that's still a tremendous windfall compared to other entitlements we're used to.
Sure.
I'm wondering if, in your opinion, if degree matters in that framework of RANds.
I mean, how do you define it? So first, one of the reasons I'm pro the PPP or pro, I'm not saying the government should have done it. I'm saying it's okay to take it. Is that the government has basically tried to destroy our lives. I consider these shutdowns just unbelievably immoral and a complete violation of the role of government and just horrific. This is government doing damage to us. Now, even if you didn't shut down, right? The fact that everybody around you shut down hurt your business. You're in the stock market. Stocks went down because the government basically decimated the U.S. economy. Not down enough, I think, given where they're up now. But government decimated the economy. The virus contributed. Markets would have gone down somewhat. But it's the government decision to shut down the economy and to shut down life, which decimated the economy. So I think it's completely legitimate for somebody who's been damaged by the government to get restitution for the damage caused. Now, there's no way then to start measuring these things out, right? You were supposed to get it to use for payroll, but we know money's fungible, right? So I use the money for payroll, but that means I've got other money that I was saving so I could do the payroll. But it really was there so you wouldn't lay off your employees. But again, why is the government even interfering in whether I lay off my employees or not? How I respond to the crisis is none of the government's business. Now it's motivating me to respond in a particular way. The whole setup is wrong and distortive and manipulative and central planning. So I say take the money. The government is screwing you out of the equivalent of money somewhere else. There are businesses that $1 million is not going to be enough for. There are businesses that after 2 months of payroll, that third month, they're going to have to lay everybody off because they won't survive, right? We know that. There are other businesses, they're going to have a windfall, which is your point. Who is going to figure out which is which? The government can't. Should owners return the money? Who's it going to go to if they return the money? What is going to be done with it if they return the money? Who does it? It's such a mess. But this is what happened. This goes back to the original question. In a mixed economy, it's a disaster. It's a mess. The government is interfering. It's subsidizing. And you can't make heads or tails of it. You can't make any logic for it. Now, if you didn't need it, and it's fine not to want it. I don't think morality says you have to take it. right? And I don't think it's wrong to return it, but I don't think it's wrong not to return it. So it really is, I think, open because of how arbitrary the whole thing is. And think about how they're screwing you. I mean, shutting down the economy, they might shut it down in the fall again. Who knows what they do if they do that? It probably won't. I think the probability of shutdowns in the fall is small, but they might. And then they'll do something else that screws us all over in some other way. It's constant, and it doesn't end at this point. And it's depressing because the only remedy for it is capitalism, and we're so far from that. So I have no, so it's a mess. But I understand the dilemma, and I don't blame people for doing whatever it is that they decide to do with it.
Thank you.
All right, Julian.
Hi, Yaron.
Hey.
So I think it's likely that America will become a fascist state in this century. What do you think is going to happen to Israel, though? Do you think is it moving in a good direction, or is it what do you think? Can you predict their future at all?
No, really. I mean, I think it's not going in a good direction. I don't think there's anything positive. There's nothing. I think it's true of the whole Western world. Israel is being led or guided by the same kind of philosophical problems that we have in the U.S. Its political system is even more of a mess than the American political system. Religion is on, the number of very religious people has skyrocketed. They've got an Arab population, they've got a Palestinian population, they've got enemies surrounding them. It's very, very difficult to project out the future of Israel and what's going to happen and to see anything really positive. The only positive thing I'd say about Israel is that it's such a small country that you can have a big impact ideologically. So the liberty movement in Israel has the potential to actually change the country more so than I think we do in America, because we have 350 million people to deal with. And it's just scale. We just don't have scale. And in Israel, they've got 8 million people to deal with. It's easier to do. So maybe they'll have an impact. I haven't seen it yet, but I have friends working on it. So we'll see. But I really don't have a positive view of any country right now, because I don't see any way intellectually moving in the right direction. Philosophically. Even if politically they might be in a better place. I mean, the UK is not bad politically, and certainly compared to the US, and the educational system is much better. So that suggests that the UK is in better condition. But New Zealand is beautiful, but it's also, there goes my video again.
Yeah,
but,
audio is still good.
Yeah, and put on in the video.
Welcome back.
But New Zealand is very leftist and got intellectual influences that are very bad. So I was much more positive, 10 years ago. Sorry. All right, let's do some super chats. We got them piling up a little bit here. Let's see. What's your prediction in New York City? Is the city going to recover, or the worst is still ahead? Should we pack and leave? What's your opinion on the dollar? Is there significant risk of inflation? Wow, there's a lot in that question. What's my prediction in New York City? New York City has this ability to always rebound and come back. And I love the city, and I love the spirit, and I love Wall Street. So I'm not going to say it can't rebound. I think it's going to be more difficult. I think this was a real wake-up call, COVID. I think the mayor he's going to be out. I think de Blasio is now universally hated. But if you think about New York in the 70s, it was in much worse shape, and it came back. So I'm not going to rule New York out. I still think there's a chance for New York to come back. Should you pack and leave? That is very much a personal values kind of question. I mean, I really do think that there are places in the U.S. that are more dominant by the bad ideas, that where the riots were worse, that you should definitely consider. You should definitely consider leaving and going to moderately freer places, like in the South or in Texas or other places. But it's so much of a value choice and a lifestyle choice that I'm not going to make specific recommendations. What's my opinion on the dollar? So far, the dollar just seems to get stronger, or this week, at least last week, it was getting stronger. Ultimately, I think it has to get weaker. Ultimately, we're going to have inflation, but I don't know when ultimately is. And weaker as compared to what? The dollar's gotten a lot weaker as compared to gold, but it hasn't got a lot weaker as compared to the euro or the pound sterling or any of these others, because as nutty as our Fed is and as nutty as our government is, their governments are even nuttier, right? So they're even worse. So maybe as compared to gold, it will continue to get weaker, which would suggest inflation. But it depends on what happens. It depends on what the Fed still does. So far, the amount of money they've injected in the economy at the same time as the destructive policies of the government, I've kind of balanced them all out in terms of the actual money out there. And a lot of that money is going into the stock market rather than into consumer prices. So you're seeing inflation, but you're seeing it in asset prices, I think, not in commodity prices. So we'll see. It's very hard to make these kind of predictions, but I don't predict that the dollar will collapse versus other currencies, because I think other currencies are in worse shape than the dollar. All right, I'm still reading, here's another one. I'm still reading Matt Ridley's new book, and I accept this point that innovation is evolutionary. But don't investors need intellectual property and patents to bring a product to market? Absolutely. And I said this in my last interview with him. I'm a huge fan of intellectual property and patents. I think they're absolutely necessary. I'm not familiar enough with the details to tell you if the intellectual property system we have today is ideal or the best. It certainly is, I think, good and good enough. I think the chapter that Matt Ridley has in the book on intellectual property is just plain wrong. He reads too many anti-IP libertarians, the same guys who are also anarchists tend to be. And they're wrong on intellectual property. And if you're interested in intellectual property issues, I will refer you to Adam Mossoff. Adam Mossoff is an objectivist and a law professor at George Mason University, and is a world expert on intellectual property and patents. So look up Adam Mossoff, George Mason University, and you'll find his work. Did you ever meet Ayn Rand? Do you think she would like video games? No, I did not meet Ayn Rand. And I have no idea if she'd like video games. I suspect she would have not liked the kind of more violent video games. I don't know, what was it? The one where you steal somebody's car and shoot everybody up and
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto, the one where you get points for murdering people and raping and so on. I have a feeling she would have hated that. But would she have hated all video games, and would she have hated the potential of video games? I just don't know. Ayn Rand was a genius and often surprised in her attitudes towards these kind of things. She might have been able to see the potential of video games in terms of what they could, I don't know, what they could actually project in terms of ideas.
She seemed generally a techno-optimist, so she might at least appreciate that aspect of them.
Yeah, I think she would have condemned kind of the stupidity of many of them, but they don't have to be stupid. If values are subjective, how does that relate to an objective morality? Values are not subjective. Values are individual, and that's not the same thing. Subjective means not based on reality, not based on facts, not based on the nature of reality or the nature of your consciousness. That is that for you, a value needs to be objective. That is, it needs to relate to your life and to the nature of reality. Right? So it has to be objective for you. So values are not subjective in the sense of anything goes. Whatever I feel like, not connected to any principle or into reason. So don't confuse the terms. They use that way. Even when the Austrian economists use subjective value, they don't really mean subjective. At least von Mises and certainly Menger didn't mean subjective value. They mean something much more similar to Ayn Rand's idea of socially objective value in the marketplace, and to personal values, personally objective values in your own life. All right, let's do one. I'll do one more super chat, and then we'll do a round, and then we'll end with the super chat. This may be a silly question, but have you listened to Peacock's Intro to Western Philosophy course posted by AOI? I think they're amazing, and I'm loving every minute of them, which I think would have to do with my interest in philosophy in general. Yes, I've listened to those courses before they were posted by AOI. I listened to them when they were on cassettes, and we used to sit around a cassette player and listen to them. They're fantastic courses. The history of Western philosophy are amazing and just phenomenal. But all of Leonard Peikoff's courses, I highly, highly recommend. You should go over all of them. Introduction to Understanding Objectivism, his philosophy course on objectivism, his advanced philosophy course on objectivism, all of his courses. There are probably 15 of them, long and short. Maybe they're more, maybe there are 20 or 30 of them, I'm not sure. They're all fantastic. Even the one, I particularly love the one he did on 8 great plays. And so anything Leonard Peikoff did is worth listening to and studying. He is a real genius and knows objectivism better than anybody alive, better than anybody other than Ayn Rand. But and he's a great, fantastic teacher. So generally, my view is, listen to everything Peikoff did and read everything. Read Opa. Supposedly Derek says there's an IP debate planned between Matt and somebody Alex suggested. I hope that's Adam Ossoff, because Adam Ossoff is the best on this stuff. All right, this is Dan. This will be the last super chat question, so please nobody ask any more super chat questions, because and everybody's it's being overwhelmed. Derek reminded me of something else. The book is really good, so you guys should definitely read Matt's book on innovation. There's a lot of good stuff there. You don't have to agree with everything in a book to get a lot out of a book. Let me also remind everybody to subscribe to the show if you're not a subscriber. About 40% of all the people who listen to the show are not subscribers. Please subscribe, and one of the benefits of subscription is every time there's a show, we'll let you know. You should also support the show, yaronbrookshow.com. Less than less than 5% of you who listen to the show in any given month actually support the show. It would be great if you did. It helps make these shows possible. It shows that you value them and that you support them. So please consider supporting the show on Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals, or on yaronbrookshow.com/support. Of course, some of you do it on Super Chat, and I can't really count that. So maybe it's more than 5%. And let's see. Finally, that's all my reminders. All right. Another quick one. Do you like opera? If so, what are some of your favorites? I love opera. Love opera. Not like. Like is too weak of a word. I love opera. I love everything Verdi wrote. Everything he wrote is worthy. And the famous ones are the great ones. From Othello to La Traviata to Aida to, they're all of Verdi. And then I love Italian opera. So all of 19th century Italian opera, from Rossini to Donizetti to, of course, Puccini, oh my God. And then I like German operas too, from Beethoven to, even Wagner. I like Wagner most of the time. Not always, but most of the time I like Wagner. Sometimes it's a little long. I get the point. Tristan and Isolde, I get it. You're dying. An hour is way too long for that to go on for. The music is though beautiful. It's just too long. I like Massenet. I've got a list here. Somebody posted a list. I love Massenet. I like Bizet. I like Donizetti. All 19th century opera. All 19th century opera. And I like Mozart, particularly certain of his operas and certain scenes within the operas are jaw-droppingly beautiful. I mean, just stunning. So I do love Mozart operas, but I am a romantic, so my preference is towards 19th century and primarily Italian. All right, Jim.
Something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I've been saying this to a lot of my friends, that I'm starting to see something, and Yaron, you bring this up in a number of your talks too, that we really do live in what we refer to as the developed world, and it's bugging me that it's a past tense word. Why are we not in the developing world anymore? And I'm starting to understand more and more why Rand spoke so lovingly about the 19th century when we had this explosion of growth, and why should that have ever ended? And there was some, you discussed earlier New York City, and I can't help but think that New York City's population is an illustration of this. And I pulled up a little chart here. Let's see if this is New York City's population. You can see the arrows over 1950. The population of one of the most significant cities in all of human history stopped in after 1950. Feel free to opine on this broadly, on the sort of death of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, there's death of growth, death of economic growth. We think 2% growth. I mean, Trump hailed this as the greatest economy ever. At 2% growth, give me a break. We should be growing at 4, 5, 6%. There's no reason we can't. And it's 3% they think is mythology. They think this is the greatest thing ever. And again, there's no reason we can't grow it close to double that. There are whole theories now in economics about how growth is over, growth is impossible, growth is bad. The whole environmentalist movement is about growth is bad. We don't build skyscrapers anymore. That's part of de Blasio's New York. They're not going to build skyscrapers supposedly anymore because they're not energy efficient or some ridiculous thing like that. The skyscrapers they do build are not particularly pretty. The tallest building going up in New York is just this box, this rectangle. It's just meaningless architecturally. There's no imagination. And it's everybody, and it's really since the New Deal. It's since FDR. The economy grew in the 50s and 60s faster than it does today, but even then it didn't grow as fast as it has the potential to grow. We stopped being a capitalist country. We stopped being a fast, unstoppable juggernaut of an economy after the Great Depression or during the Great Depression. The 1920s are the last era where we saw that. And even then, some of it was manipulated by the Fed and so on. So you already got the beginnings of a mixed economy and statism. So very, very sad and difficult to explain to people. And Ayn Rand complained about the 19th century was not, or comment about the 19th century, was not primarily about economic growth. It was primarily about a sense of life, attitude. And among those is the attitude to growth, the attitude to success, and just a benevolence and a joie de vivre, a love of life, a love of happiness, that she said that if you didn't experience it directly, then you could never know what it was like. And it all ended in World War I. World War I was the end of the 19th century, spiritually. And she saw a little bit of it because she lived in that, the first 10, 15 years were during that period where it was still there, and she still had a vague, some recollections of it and of the spirit of it. And I think it to some extent, it shaped her, that spirit of the 19th century. It's hard to imagine the damage World War I did to the world. I mean, somebody's going to have to write a book on that or do a seminar. I mean, people have, but from an objectivist perspective, nobody else there. It really shattered the belief in capitalism, the belief in freedom, the belief in progress, the belief in beauty. Art changes, politics changes, everything changes after World War I. Now, it's all a progression of philosophy, But World War I is the existential event that literally kills an entire generation of poets, artists, painters, sculptors, musicians who could have written those great symphonies that are now dead, or if they survived, were so traumatized by the horrors of the war that they would never be benevolent again. Jennifer?
Is there a difference between pragmatism and utilitarianism?
Say that again. I missed the beginning of that.
Is there a difference between pragmatism and utilitarianism?
Yeah, I mean, utilitarianism has a goal. Maximize the most happiness for the most number of people, or maximize some utility, achieve the most economic growth for as many people as possible. I mean, every utilitarian is going to phrase it a little differently. But it does have an aspect. It could be long-term. It could be, it could involve certain principles, not principles in the same sense we mean them, not principles focused on individuals, but some grand ideas. Pragmatism is the negation of any principle and the negation of the long run. You can't have a long run because you can't have principles. So, but who knows what will happen in the future? It's a complete embrace of epistemological subjectivism and the unknowability of the world. And so pragmatism is get away with whatever you can right now. That's what it boils down to in the end. Achieve your goal right now. And it's not achieve your goal. So pragmatism is not a moral philosophy. It's not about achieving the goal for somebody's happiness, of somebody else's well-being. It's just achieving a goal, whatever the goal happens to be. That pragmatism applies to utilitarianism is a moral theory, a bad one, but a moral theory. It's about an attitude that suggests making the world better in some grand sense.
Thank you.
All right, Darius. I think we lost Julian and Jonathan.
I'm good, Yaron. Thank you.
Sure. Hans?
A quick one, I hope, because cutting into my dinner time with my wife. But I think this will be. I listened to your recent show on the war on drugs, which I thought was fantastic. The war on drugs has been an abject failure, and on all accounts. But I thought about the legal implementation of this and how it fits in with crime. So if you get caught committing a crime or driving under the influence of some hard drug like cocaine or heroin, is there any kind of inherent difference between that and, say, just alcohol that would cause the legal system and impose a greater penalty because of the greater risk you're taking by using that mind-altering drug? Or is it really pretty much the same as alcohol or other types of mind-altering substances?
I don't know, but that would be a scientific question, right? So I believe that driving under the influence of marijuana is probably less risky than alcohol, but I'm not sure. But maybe driving under the influence of LSD may be even impossible. I don't know that you could actually do it. But then I can imagine certain drugs where you become a maniac and you're really endangering people. So I think there would be a scale, but it would have to be determined by science in terms of what kind of state of mind, what kind of detachment from reality does each drug cause, and how do they rank relative to alcohol, and what should be the penalties accordingly. So yes, the more risk you pose, the more you should know better, the more the penalty should be with regard to driving, for example.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. And feel free to leave if you have to. So don't feel like you have to stay on.
Thank you.
4 super chat questions I'm going to rush through, and then I'm going to release everybody. What's wrong with anti-lockdown protesters carrying guns to state capitol? That's the entire point of the Second Amendment, to show state officials we won't be pushed around. But they did push you around. I mean, nobody opened up Michigan because you carried weapons into the state house, and you didn't launch a revolution. So it was just you were faking them out. So it was just to intimidate, but not to intimidate because you meant it. I mean, I've said this before in talks to Second Amendment supporters, and I'm, to rabid Second Amendment supporters, which I am not. I'm a supporter, but not a rabid one. if you want to start a revolution, I might join you, right? I'm not opposed to it, but let's get serious. You know, let's talk about actually doing a revolution and what that entails. And it doesn't entail marching in with a couple of M16s into the State House, right? They would wipe you out in seconds if they wanted to. Right? And it doesn't mean faking them out. All it was an intimidation that was neither declaring a revolution or not. If you want to declare a revolution, declare it already. Stop grandstanding.
I think
Stop
they were tagging
threatening.
along.
Stop. But it's just to intimidate people. And it's scary. And if all you're doing is just trying to be scary, it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate. And the fact is, it didn't work. Didn't threaten anybody. And the next day, I know at least one of the local Congress people came up with her own armed guards, who are carrying weapons to escort it. Is that really the world we want to live in? Where congressmen and people going around about their government business are escorted with armed guards, and we engage. What are we going to engage with exactly? I mean, in the next election, vote this governor out, replace her with somebody better. If you think it's too late for elections, then plot a revolution. But get serious about it. If you're plotting a revolution, the last thing you want to do is show the government who has guns and where you live. You want to do it underground. You want to do it in secret. You want to be accumulating weapons that are far stronger than the ones you have. And you want to start building a whole infrastructure. So when you launch a revolution, you have a chance of winning, and you do that in secret. Anyway.
Should these Capitol buildings have restrictions on people carrying guns?
It's ridiculous to have. I mean, I think a lot of buildings should have restrictions on having guns. I mean, it's fine to have an open carry, but if I own a building, you don't come into my building with a gun, right? And I don't think the State House should allow people to carry guns. Is it immoral to take unemployment while working off the books? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Again, the government has caused this unemployment. They've caused this situation. Without an objectivist framework, you can't really know how the world works or have any sense of meaning in life. I think that's true. I think that's why we're such a crisis of meaning and such a crisis really of understanding. Been waiting forever to ask you this. Should Israel have bombed the Aswan Dam during the Yom Kippur War? I think, I haven't thought about it, so I don't see any reason not to, but I would have kept it as a way to stop the Egyptians if they were going to win, right? So there was a point in the war where the Egyptians looked like they were going to win and heading towards the Sinai, up the Sinai towards Israel. Now, if that were happening, then yes. I mean, Israel literally had nukes in the air. So Israel was willing to use nukes in the 73 war. So bombing the Aswan Dam, which might require a nuke, I don't know if maybe conventional weapons would still destroy it, would actually be appropriate. But given that they were halted, I think it could have been used as a threat. It could have been used in a variety of different ways. I don't know that just bombing it in the middle of the war would have saved that many Israeli lives. And unfortunately, Israel, being a small country, also has to take into account what the American response would have been. America doesn't have to take into account anybody's response. Israel has to take into account America's response. And I think the response would have been pretty bad. So I would leave it kind of as a last resort, not as a first one. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me, guys. Thanks for all the support from the everybody who was on with me. Thank you to the Super Chat. Don't forget to share the show. Don't forget to like it. Don't forget to subscribe. I will see you all. We'll see either tomorrow or Tuesday for a regular show at a regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, either Monday or Tuesday. Bye, everybody. Have a great.
Thanks, Yaron.
Good premises.
Bye, Yaron.
Bye.